All right, welcome back to the Net to Net podcast with your host Sam Kelty and Caleb Kirsch. Today's episode is our college football edition, previewing the last week's games from week 8 and previewing the games. Recapping the games from week 8 and previewing the games for week 9 this upcoming week, as well as talk about where the Heisman players are at halfway through the season and who I have for this week's edition of my top 4 going to the college football playoffs. So we're going to jump right in. I'm going to swing it off to Caleb as he will be my guide for this week.
So, yeah, we're going to start from the lowest ranked at 25, UCLA versus Stanford. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so that was a very good game for UCLA. They needed a bounce-back game in the likes of just a pick-me-up after their, I would say their loss, a pretty bad loss to Oregon State Beavers last 2 weeks ago. Good win off of Stanford, but there is concern for the likes of who is going to be the quarterback this week going in to the game for UCLA. We saw last week against Stanford, Dante Moore played a little bit, and so did Ethan Gabbert, and so did Chase Griffin. There's 3 quarterbacks, he said, that could start anywhere at a Power 5 school. Ethan Gabbert got most of the reps last week. He looked pretty good, 20 of 28 for 2 touchdowns for 240. I believe he will start against Colorado this week, but pretty much it's the same old. They really relied on the run game, and the run game from Carson Steele, and we saw that pretty much has been a bright spot all season when they've been struggling with getting the ball out of the pocket, if that's Dante Moore or Ethan Gabbert that we've seen. They don't have the same quarterback that they had with DTR last year and previous years, where they kind of they have raw quarterback play this year just because they're also young and inexperienced, but they really have been relying on Carson Steele. Carson Steele has been very good this season. He's been averaging about 9.1 yards receiving, and he averages about 5.3 yards rushing. He has about almost 600 yards with 6 touchdowns. Pretty good this year. The offensive line has been holding up. They've been able to hit the A gap, been able to hit the B gap. Getting downhill is really the most important thing for UCLA as an offensive line. Getting into that second level to get the block for Steele. But in all fairness, it was a good game. They should have won. Stanford's been kind of streaky this year. They've been an underdog, kind of, but not really. We saw when they beat Colorado State when we all went to bed when it was 29-0, and Stanford comes back and wins in triple overtime. But they play Colorado this week. I like UCLA's chances. Doesn't matter who is playing at quarterback. Colorado. I just want to say Colorado. People are like, "Oh, Colorado's making the top 20. It's going to be in the top 25. They're going to be in the playoffs. They have Deion Sanders. They have the best team. They got Travis Hunter, the guy that can play on both sides of the ball." And we're sitting here. They're 4-3. They're dead last in the Pac-12. And this Pac-12 year is very competitive. We're talking about UCLA. They're 5-2, and they're in 6th place in the Pac-12. This is how competitive the Pac-12 is. This is what we like to see. And potentially the Pac-12's last season ever before they disband. And Colorado, last in the league in running. They are last in the league in defensive run, dead last. And they're going against a really good run game, which UCLA likes to rely on because Chip Kelly's system is the quarterback option always. It's either quick throws out in the pocket or they hand it off to Steele and let him do what he does best. But I like UCLA this week against Colorado, and it was an easy win for them last week against Stanford.
Okay. So next is Iowa, 24 up against Minnesota.
Yeah. So Iowa, a very good game for them. They've been kind of weird this year. I know Iowa last week they played. Who did they play against? Sorry,
Minnesota.
Minnesota. So Iowa played Minnesota last week, which was a very good game. It was their first game without Eric All, the tight end, who they lost for the duration of the season. They also lost Cade McNamara, who a lot of people listening to this podcast remember that name. I know, Chris, you remember that name. He was the old Michigan quarterback. And so that was a very interesting game for them because we got to see what they looked like without their top quarterback, their top two tight ends, actually. Let's be clear, because I remember on the last episode I did bring up that they did not have both their tight ends. So it was a very low scoring game. It was 10-12. Minnesota with the upset. There was a lot of struggle from Iowa. And we're sitting here. Iowa was in prime position to overtake Wisconsin in the conference standings, to put themselves in a position to be in the conference championship, to play either Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State. And we just didn't see the urgency from Iowa that this entire game. They struggled with, like I mentioned, a new quarterback. It did not look good from any type of the ball, and Minnesota saw that and exploited it. They got to Deacon Hill a lot. They got 6 sacks as a team with 4 TFLs. Made Deacon turn over the ball, and we think of Iowa as a good run game, and we've seen a very good run game over the last few years. From 4 players, they had a combined 11 yards rushing, because Deacon Hill had a negative 22 yards rushing on 8 carries. That's pretty bad. And your top rusher was Caleb Johnson with 18 yards. And this is a Minnesota team that has lost a few good defenders over the last few years. Boye Mafe, a Thomas Rush, just to name a few guys that have been critical on the defensive side. And they took total advantage of Iowa's injuries and lack of urgency throughout the entire game. And it was also Minnesota's first win against Iowa since 1999.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So next up is Tulane versus North Texas.
Yeah. Tulane, North Texas, that was an easy win for Tulane. Tulane's been very good all season. A top 25 team. No issues there. They're 6-1. Pratt looks like a top quarterback in this country. He's looked pretty good since having those injury histories in his previous couple seasons. North Texas, it was a lot closer than I thought, but Tulane pulled it out and got the dub. And they're taking on, I believe they take on Rice next week at Rice. Should be another win.
Yeah. This is the military game. Air Force versus Navy.
Yeah, that was a very good game coming up. Army's coming off a disappointing loss, which we also coming when you play a top 5 team, or sorry, not top 5 team, a top 25 team in LSU last week and losing 62-0. That's unfortunate for Army, which they had no answer for, but they are playing their rival, the Air Force. And let's be clear, Air Force is 7-0. They're first in the MWC, the Mountain West Conference. They have good wins over Utah State, San Jose State, and San Diego State, and fashionable wins. And this is a team where you really see, like the military teams, they don't really throw the ball that much. They rely on their run game. And when you have four people over 300 yards with the likes of Emmanuel Michael, Zach Lair, um, Owen Burke, just to name a few. These guys are all over 300 yards. They have 8, 4, and 3 touchdowns respectively from those three, and they contribute in the ground on the ground. It's a lot of run game from what we see with these military teams, and they do a lot of running plays. Not a lot. You see when you watch those games when they play those big teams, they're always in that kind of that H shape. They have the two fullbacks and then the H back behind directly behind the quarterback, which they like to run out of that fast pace run game. They'll run the ball maybe like 30, 40 times a game, maybe throw it 15, 20 maybe a game, maybe even less. I like Air Force in this. I think they'll win. They've just been very good this season.
All right, so Missouri, they went up against South Carolina.
Yeah. So Missouri, they beat South Carolina. They moved up 4 spots to number 16 this week in the polls. They easily beat South Carolina. South Carolina has been one of the most inconsistent teams all season. Spencer Rattler has not looked good. Mizzou looks pretty good. They forced Spencer to turn over the ball. Not a lot in the pass game, which Brady Cook only threw for about almost 200 yards, 1 touchdown. It was more of a run game. They ran it 26 times with Cody Schrader for 3 touchdowns and a score. Big test coming up against Georgia this week, the number 1 team in the nation. I think that Missouri can get it done. I think they can put some pressure on Georgia. I don't think they'll beat Georgia, but I think they can put some pressure. Missouri is a really good defensive team. They get pressure to the quarterback. They usually rush about 3 to 4 guys, and they like to do a lot of cover 2, a lot of Tampa 2 coverage, which is very good because we've seen Georgia struggle against those kind of coverages. And when you send 4 downhill in transition to rush the quarterback, you're going to put pressure on Carson Beck, which is going to make Carson Beck step up into the pocket and try to force him. If you can cover those go routes, those out routes that Georgia likes to do, you will be totally fine because then Carson Beck will panic and then have to make something happen either with his feet or he's going to throw a turnover or he's just going to throw the ball away. And this is a Georgia team that I did mention last week. This is going to be a totally different look team coming into this week due to the fact that Brock Bowers, their number 1 tight end, their number 1 receiver, he's like a Travis Kelce. He can line up at the tight end. He can line up in the receiver as a receiver. He is not playing. He has no timetable to return. He had surgery last week during their bye week. Everything flows through Brock Bowers. He is the best tight end in this coming class. He is the best tight end we've seen since probably Kyle Pitts when we were saying Kyle Pitts is a top 5 pick. He's a big body. He's a big receiver. Brock Bowers, I see a lot of Travis Kelce in him. I see a lot of Greg Kittle in him. Brock Bowers is someone that everything has to go through him. When Carson Beck has no one to throw to, when Georgia is struggling to get the ball out and they can't run the ball, they rely on Brock Bowers. So now you had a bye week, you rejuvenate because we've seen Georgia struggle against certain defenses in the SEC, minus the Kentucky game, but they did struggle against the likes of South Carolina when they played, the likes of Auburn when they played. Those games were close. Even they struggled against Vanderbilt when Brock Bowers went down. And like I mentioned, you get that pressure. You send 3 to 4 players. You rely on that run game because you're going to have to throw the ball sometime. And we saw Carson Beck struggle without Brock Bowers being there because he had to rely on a Dominic Lovett or a Ladd McConley. You have to rely on other players, or they really relied heavily on the run game from DeJuan Edwards. So that's where it's going to get interesting to see going down the stretch of the year.
Okay. USC and Utah played last week.
Oh, that was a great game to watch. Utah, they're the bullies of the Pac-12. They always find a way to beat teams that they probably shouldn't beat. Utah, without Cameron Rising's not playing this season, so we can all stop talking about Cameron Rising if he's going to play or not. Utah, they moved up one spot from 14 to 13 after that huge win against USC, kicking a field goal at the end of the game just to win it. We're talking about a USC team who has been struggling of late. They kept Caleb Williams off the score sheet and throwing touchdown. He did run one in, but he did struggle a lot. He has not looked like himself since the Notre Dame game. He honestly hasn't looked like himself when they played Colorado or Arizona. And those games were within 7 or less points. And we're talking about a guy that at the beginning of the season, up until the Notre Dame game, was saying Caleb Williams has a chance to do something no one else has done since Archie Griffin, and that is go back-to-back Heisman winning campaigns. You can kiss that goodbye now. He is done. This USC team is I'm gonna say it. They're a fraud. They're a fraud top 25 team.
Yeah, I agree.
Because we're like, okay, Caleb Williams coming into the game against Notre Dame, he threw one interception all season. He threw 3 against Notre Dame because they sent 4 to 5 players downhill. They had a Mike linebacker doing a spy. Had great coverage, and they just struggled. And when you get pressure like that from USC, they got to the quarterback 3 times. They had a bunch of pressures, and USC's defense has looked terrible all season. They got to the quarterback 1 time against Bryson Barnes. Bryson Barnes had an unbelievable game. 14 of 23, 235 yards. He had 3 touchdowns and 1 interception with a QBR of 79. Yes, Caleb Williams went 24 of 34, but no touchdowns. He struggled throwing the ball. They kept him moving out of the pocket. And then, like I said, Utah's the bully of the Pac-12. This week, they're bringing in a lovely team coming from Eugene, Oregon for college game day. The Oregon Ducks. The Oregon Ducks are coming to Utah. And let's see what Utah can do. This Oregon Duck team is hungry. They want another shot at Washington when it comes time for the conference championship. But honestly, I would be a little scared of this Utah team. This Utah team shown that they can play with the big boys. They're 3-1 in conference play. They're 6-1 on the season. They do have a tough schedule going up. They still have to play Washington. They still have to play Oregon. They still have to play an Arizona State team that gave Washington troubles, which I'll talk about that in a little bit. And they still got to play an Arizona team that has given teams troubles. This Pac-12 season is very competitive, and we're seeing why when they have half the teams vying for a spot in the Pac-12 championship and can make a push for a college football playoff spot. But it's a lot. We still have a long way to go. But I like Utah. I think this game's going to go down. The Oregon game versus Utah is going to go down to whoever has the ball with 2 minutes left.
Okay. Auburn and Ole Miss.
Yeah, so Auburn Ole Miss game. That's on
the yeah.
Yep. Ole Miss won 28-21. Auburn has not looked good really this season. They're 3-4. Jackson Dart looks very underrated for this season. He looked pretty good. They really rely on the run game. Another team that really relies on the run game. They don't really do much throwing, and this is a lane Kevin offense that I'm shocked that they don't really rely on the throw game, which once it gets down to the rest of the season, especially when they go up against the likes of Texas A&M and Georgia to finish out their season, it's going to be you got to throw the ball. You're going to have to compete. You're going to have to keep up with scoring because they're going to throw the ball a lot. They are going to throw, and you have to compete with them. You have to match like for like. I think Ole Miss could do it. I like their chances against Texas A&M and Vanderbilt in the next couple of weeks, but Georgia will be the big test. But good win for them. Auburn has struggled all season, which no shocker there. Auburn's struggled for a while.
Tennessee and Alabama.
Yep. So Tennessee, Alabama. That was a good game. Tennessee goes into the half leading 22-7. And then Alabama comes out of nowhere and scores 27 unanswered. This is what I've been saying all season about Tennessee. Most inconsistent team there is. And we're talking about Joe Milton, who's a really good quarterback, but he's struggled of late to keep consistency. And that's really what Tennessee has the issue with. That's why they're 5-2 and they're 2-2 in conference play. We're talking about a team that has disappeared in the second half all season. Some games they disappeared, but they still managed to win the game. But they disappeared against Florida. They disappeared against Texas A&M, and they disappeared against Alabama. And Alabama has looked like a different team ever since they lost Texas. And I think that has to do something with Jalen Milrose. Jalen Milrose looks like a totally different player since being benched. He looks more confident. He looks better. He's relying on Jalen McClellan, their running back. He is not forcing turnovers. He is not forcing the ball. He is not trying to do too much with it. He's reading coverages better. He's going through all of his progressions. We would see him go through a couple progressions and then panic at the beginning of the season. Now we're seeing him go through his progressions. He's looking at his receivers going deep for the go routes, the post route. He's looking at his tight end. He's looking at his running back, the check down. He's taking the time, and that also has factor with how good their offensive line has been. They're very raw, they're young, inexperienced, but they have some great guys on the offensive line. They got probably a top guard in this year upcoming draft in CJ Latham. They have some big boys on the offensive line at tackle that give Jalen time to throw the ball and give him enough time in the pocket to go through all his reads. And then when he does, he makes the smart decision on when to run and when to slide. And that's a big help with Jalen Milrose and his confidence going through the end of the season, because let's be real. This is the team that's going to play Georgia for the conference championship at the end of the season. And what we've seen throughout the entire season with the offensive line being young and being able to hold up with James Brockmeyer and CJ Latham, like I mentioned, and Elijah Pickett. Like, these guys can hold their own. And then if everything can come together with the receivers and the running game from Jermaine Burton to Jalen McMillan, or Jace McMillan, sorry, and if they can get all on the same page, this could they make a push for the playoffs? Because technically they're not out. They only have one loss. And it was a loss to Texas, which is a good loss if Texas keeps winning.
Virginia and North Carolina.
Yeah, big upset. Virginia got the better of Drake May, who honestly has been – Drake May is not putting up the same numbers he has been last year, but he is still probably the second best quarterback in the country behind Caleb Williams. And, well, stats-wise, Caleb Williams. But Drake May, NFL-ready prospect, just a bad game. He got picked off at the end when they were driving down the field, but I liked what I saw from Drake May. He threw over 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, 24-48. Tez Walker had another amazing game, 1 touchdown, 146 yards. It's great to see him back playing again, because he has been exploding since he's returned, since he's been deemed eligible. North Carolina, yes, they lost, but they're not unranked yet. They still have to go up against Duke in a couple weeks, but I like them. I think that Duke and North Carolina will be the ACC the ACC conference championship game between those two. Clemson's pretty much done. They're pretty much over. They have struggled too much. I like those two going up against each other. I think Florida State could also be there, but I feel like something's going to happen with Florida State, and they're going to end up losing a couple games towards the end, because they still have to play. They still have to play Pitt and Miami, and then end the season with Florida, and those are some tough games.
Okay. Oregon and Washington State.
Yeah. Oregon, Washington State. This is a great game for Oregon. And a bounce back game after that tough loss against Washington. I think that game could have went either way with Washington, Oregon, but Oregon came out on all cylinders. They did start off a little slow, but Bucky Irving got loose. He's showing why he's one of the best running backs in the country. He had 129 yards with 2 touchdowns. Bo Nix, 18 of 25 for 203 and 2 touchdowns. He's still in the running for the Heisman. He does not turn the ball over. We're talking about an experienced veteran at the quarterback position. I just want to read you these lovely stats. 2,000 yards, 19 touchdowns, 1 interception. That 1 interception was this year against Colorado. And it was also a tip pass that got caught. And I just want to say, how many times do you think Bo Nix has been sacked this year? Just asking. How many times do you think Bo Nix has been sacked?
Pretty low. I know that.
What do you think? As
15?
A guess. 3 times. Bo Nix has been sacked 3 times. That shows how good our offensive line is for Oregon. And we talk about the weapons around him that gives him time in the pocket to pass. And we're talking about going up against a really good Washington defense that only got to the quarterback 1 time against Bo Nix. And that's because they flushed him out of the pocket. The rest of the time, they couldn't flush him out of the pocket. He found one of his favorite targets in Tez Johnson. Fun fact, they are brothers. Tez Johnson is his adopted brother. But we talking about Bo Nix, who is playing his way into a first-round pick next year's draft. They had 32 scouts at the Michael Penix Bo Nix showdown 2 weeks ago, and I believe they sent 6 scouts to the Washington State game. Bo Nix has been unbelievable. And then you have a 2-headed monster with Bucky Irving and Jordan James going over 100 yards each. And then, honestly, this was a very quiet game for Troy Franklin, their number 1 receiver. Very quiet game, but he has 768 yards, 8 touchdowns. He averages 17.5 per catch yardage-wise. First game since the first game of the season where he had 0 touchdowns. And actually, he had a 3-game streak of over 100 yards going into the Wazoo game. Oregon's not out of it yet. They are going to be playing for this Pac-12 championship at the end of the season. Yes, they have to play UCLA still. Yes, they have to play USC. Yes, they still have to play the Beavers in the Civil War rivalry at the end of the season. But we forget that against they don't play UCLA this year, but you forget. Guess where? And yes, we still have the Utah game, but they could make the playoffs still. They have a chance. They definitely still have a chance. They still get another crack at Washington. But like I mentioned, yes, we have to go to Utah. But guess where USC and Oregon State have to go to? They have to go to the Oztune Stadium, the 4th loudest stadium in the country. You're not going to be able to hear anything. That stadium is going to be loud. It's going to be packed. We're going to probably don some sick jerseys again, like we do every year, and we're going to get the dub done with Bo Nix, and he's going to propel them into the top 10, and they're going to make the college football playoffs, I think, if they can win out against USC, Utah, and Oregon State, and they get another crack at Washington. Don't count out the Pac-12 this year because it's been exciting all season. But this Oregon team is complete. It's all complete all around.
Texas and Houston.
Whew. All right. This is going to be big. The downfall of Texas is going to begin, and it's going to begin this week. Yes, they got the job done against Kansas. Yes, Kansas. And people are probably like, Kansas? That's a basketball school. No, They're a football school right now, and they have shown why they've been ranked. They've looked pretty good uh, for the most part. Uh, but it's an interesting game. Sorry, did you say Texas versus Kansas?
Houston.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry, not Kansas. Houston. Yes, Houston. They're probably thinking they're also a basketball school because they do so well in basketball. It still works out.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you said Kansas for a second because I was like, wait, they played last week. But
Yeah.
still think the downfall will happen. I hate to say it. Curse,
Not gonna happen.
Curse, you're a Texas fan. I don't know if
I
you know
wouldn't say a
this.
Texas fan. They're a team after Ohio State that I enjoy.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but
Let me hear it. What's gonna happen?
Quinn Ewers ain't playing next week.
Why? Is
Quinn
he hurt?
Ewers got hurt.
Well,
Quinn
okay.
Ewers.
You
went
could have prefaced
down.
with that. You could have prefaced with that.
I could have, but I wanted to keep you on your toes.
Okay.
Quinn Ewers gets injured in the first quarter because he collided with two defenders. And guess what? They're not even starting. They didn't even put in Arch Manning. They put in Malik Murphy to get the job done to close out the game. Quinn Ewers, he was playing really good. 23 to 29, 2 touchdowns, 211 yards. But they're going with Murphy this week. Will likely start against I forget who they play this week. As they play BYU Cougars, with Quinn Ewers injured his throwing shoulder. He suffered a grade 2 AC joint sprain in his right shoulder during the game. He is going to miss time. They did not say how many times, but it will be week to week, more specifically. But his throwing shoulder, that's going to be key going down the stretch, especially when they're probably going to have to go up against an Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. I would say Cincinnati, but we're terrible. We'll talk about them in a little bit. But Quinn Ewers, big loss. I see them struggling next week against BYU. BYU is a good defense. I like their chances. BYU defensively is one of the best teams in the country. Defensively, they score about 24.3 points off of turnovers on the defensive side. They're very good at the pass game. So look to see them struggle. Look to see Texas struggle without Quinn Ewers there. But if Quinn Ewers can suit up and go, then the downfall will not start yet. But it's kind of funny that they aren't starting Arch Manning, who literally reclassified to play early, enrolled early in college to play, but he will not be playing. They are going to go with the redshirt freshman Malik Murphy. So we'll see. I know Arch Manning struggled. He's struggled to make that transition from high school to college. During the orange and white game, he got picked off 9 times. So that's kind of concerning. But Texas, if they can hold out and Quinn Ewers somehow returns, I think they could beat BYU. But if he's not playing, that's going to be a lot closer game. And we'll see how the end of the season goes because we'll see if Quinn Ewers returns in time to push them for a college football playoff spot. Also, fun fact, I actually, in preview to who I have making the college football playoffs this week, based off of this week, I think I'm very consistent every week with having the Big 12 not make it. But that's just me. So let's move on.
Interesting. Oklahoma, UCF.
That went down to the wire. You got Dylan Gabriel playing against his former team where he played for 3 years for the UCF Knights. They played in Norman, Oklahoma this week. Dylan Gabriel pulls it off, keeps them undefeated, 7-0. Dylan Gabriel had a great game. He was 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, over 253 yards. Really relied on the for the throwing. Nick Anderson had a very good game, 105 yards, 2 touchdowns, and the son of Bob Stoop, Drake Stoop, chipped in for 1 touchdown with 60 yards on 7 receptions, which this Oklahoma team could be pushing Texas. They are pushing Texas right now at that number one spot in the Big 12, and it will probably come down to those two. Um, but I like Oklahoma this week. Oklahoma's already beaten Texas once this year. Um, I think it's going to be another great game, but I like Texas. Going towards the end of the year, I think they have an easier schedule, but I think once it comes down to it in the Big 12 championship, Oklahoma's going to get the job done. They play against Kansas, who Kansas is a basketball school, but they're 5-2. They've been good this season. I don't count them out, but Oklahoma is going to overpower them and win this game easily coming up. But last week against UCF, it was a good game. I thought the upset was going to happen, but Dylan Gabriel, he knows how UCF thinks, knows how they play, was able to exploit. We saw some misreads from the defense, which allowed Nick Anderson to get up the field and score very easily at certain times throughout the game.
Okay. Arizona State and Washington.
Yeah, that was a big game. Washington started off slow. Very, 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 very slow. We're talking about a Washington team that just came off scoring 40 points against Oregon. 40 plus against Oregon. And you have probably the number one quarterback in the country in Michael Penix Jr. He has looked unbelievable. I think he deserves the Heisman this year with 20 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. They should have easily won against Arizona State. Yes, Ken Dillingham, the former offensive coordinator for the Oregon Ducks, was on the other sidelines, and he did a really good job. And their defensive staff did a really good job. The final score was 15-7. Funny enough, their only touchdown. And funny enough, you have to hear this, but the first touchdown for Washington in that game was a pick six, and he went 90 yards to score the first touchdown for Washington. Also, the defense, I 100% think that Ken Dillingham talked to Dan Lanning before the game because they forced Michael Penix 3 interceptions, 3 turnovers. 2 turnovers and a fumble for 3 turnovers. They forced that out of a guy that has been very good with keeping the ball and protecting it. And when you shut down that offense, they panic. And we saw it a lot. They would send 3 or 4 guys at him downhill in transition, forcing him out of the pocket and forcing him to make mistakes, to throw the ball away, to throw it in double cover. And we saw that in the Oregon game. When you put pressure in Michael Penix's face, he struggled. And yes, they were without Jalen McNeilon again, who tried to play last game but didn't end up. But you stopped their run game. The most yards they had was 13 yards from Will Nixon, and that was 1 carry. They shut down Dylan Johnson for 6 yards on 8 carries. They could not run the ball against that talented defensive line. They got to the quarterback so many times. And put pressure on them. Yes, they didn't get any sacks, but they put pressure. They got tackles for loss. They got so many quarterback hurries and stuff. And they shut down the defensive line of Washington. No sacks for Washington. And we're talking about a talented defense that has ZTF, Zion Tuafoli-Fetiu. They have the likes of Michelle Powell. They have Braylon Trice. They have some good big dogs on the defensive line that they could not get to Trenton Bourget, who yes, he threw an interception, but he was able to control the game. And yes, it was 82 yards, no touchdowns from Rome Odozie, and 102 yards for Jalen Polk. And I said this last week. Washington might have the best group of receivers in the country. We think of best receivers. We talk about Ohio State with Emeka Mbuka and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Julian Fleming. We really haven't seen much of Julian Fleming this year. But we're talking about a complete trio of receivers. I'm looking at Washington. They got, like I said, Jalen Polk. They got Romeo Oduzier, who's probably the second best receiver in this draft class coming up. And I'll talk about that on my special mock draft 1.0. which is out now, which I will be releasing soon on Instagram for that link soon. And Jalen McNeil when healthy, probably the best three receiver trio in the country. I don't see a team rivaling that right now. And Odunze is very good. He's big. He can go up and get that ball, especially if you go one-on-one at the top and throw a fade on the outside because he can catch anything. He's very good. He rivals Marvin Harrison Jr. with doing that as well. They both can do it. They both do some unbelievable things. Odunze might be a little bit, might have better hands, but overall Marvin Harrison Jr. blows him out. Anything else, but Odunze, he's shown why he should be one of the top receivers drafted this year. He's looked unbelievable. But yeah, good game for Washington. They were able to pull out the win at the end of the game, but I would kind of be worried going into the season because the rest of the season because Washington has one of the toughest schedules in this conference in this year, other than Oregon and I believe trying to think. I think Florida State might have another tough one, but Washington still got to play USC at the Coliseum. They still have to have Utah come to them. They still have to travel to Oregon again. Travel to Oregon to play Oregon State, and then they have to play Washington State at the end of the season. So they have a tough schedule. One of the toughest schedules going into the year. But I like them against Stanford. I think this will be a bounce back game for them.
Okay. Penn State versus the future college football champions, Ohio State.
A lot of issues with that statement, but yeah,
that's gonna happen. I mean, come on.
Ohio State, they got the win with a lot of injuries that might hurt them later on in the season. No Travion Henderson, no Mecca Mbuka, no Denzel Tate on the backside. Yes, they got Mayan Williams back. Marvin Harrison had an unbelievable game, but Kyle McCord, he's starting to find his own. And like I've been saying all season, it's literally 2014 Ohio State vibes. Not the same players, not the same team, but similar aspects of Kyle McCord starting off very slow at the beginning of the season, going and progressing throughout the season. No Trayvon Henderson, which could hurt them. Mayan Williams did struggle. He did not get over 100 yards, but he did have a touchdown. He averaged about 2.6. He's not that traditional running back that can get a lot of yards. He's more of a pound-for-pound guy in between the tackles. Doesn't really run outside like Travion Henderson does. And they're also different players. My only thing is you have no Mbuka, and you really relied on Marvin Harrison and Cade Stewart. Now, yes, Penn State is a very good defense. And I was talking about them last episode. Most sacks in the country, most pressures. They kept quiet. This Ohio State offensive line, it's very experienced offensive line. They kept Penn State's defense, who is one of the best in the country, very quiet. Which Kalen King, I thought, was going to put more of a fight against Marvin Harrison Jr., which he did struggle because he had to do got called for a lot of PI because he couldn't really defend him. Kalen King is probably one of the best cornerbacks in the country other than Kool-Aid McGinstry out of Bama or Dewan Cooper out of Iowa. Kalen King is a very good player. But Ohio State, they got the job done in the shoe. Now, pretty much Penn State's pretty much done at this point because their next game will be against who I think is the best team in the country, the most complete team in the Big Ten, that has the best quarterback in the country. Yes, they play Indiana this week. Should be a dub. Should get that. But then they have to play Michigan week 11 on November 11th after playing Indiana and Maryland. They go up against the best team in the country. I think it's the best team in the country, the most complete team in the country, the best quarterback in the country, or not country, but the best quarterback in the Big Ten. J.J. McCarthy, Michigan. That's going to be their big test. They're going to probably lose that and pretty much be out of the college football playoffs. This is what I'm thinking. This loss to Ohio State pretty much kind of showed who's going to be who's going to compete with Michigan for that number one spot to get into the Big Ten championship, because those three are all on the same side on the East for the division. I think Michigan personally will beat Ohio State. They're home, but we'll see how this goes with the whole sign stealing, because we don't know where that's going to happen. What's going to happen? Michigan State, I'm shocked that they even played last game against Michigan because they were protesting. They met with player and safety. They met with the board. They were almost not going to play that game due to safety reasons. But Michigan, if they do play and they aren't cheating, they are still the number one team. They are the best team in the Big Ten, hands down. Yes, Ohio State's defense is very good, but their offense is shaky. Michigan will try to shut down Marvin Harrison Jr., which will happen. Michigan's very good defense. They are in defense. They're number 4 in total yards allowed. They're number 6 in passing yards, and they're number 20th in rushing yards. They shut down teams. They don't let them do anything, and they're actually teams are averaging 5.9 points against them, which is insane for a defense to allow that to happen. I like Michigan. They're one of the best offenses in the country. They average about 40.6 points a game, which is 6th in the country. And like I said, yes, Ohio State is a great defense. So look for them to hold up for most of the season, but their big test will be now Michigan, and that's their focus for the rest of the season. But they do have a nice game coming up against Wisconsin, who they're arguably going against one of the best running backs in the Big Ten in Brandon Allen, and our former coach, Luke Fickell, who's coached at both Ohio State and Cincinnati. So it should be a good game. They had traveled to Wisconsin, but we talked about this Ohio State defense, pretty good. I like their chances against Wisconsin. Don't see Wisconsin winning. So I'm going to Ohio State this week against Wisconsin. But good win out of Penn State, and I knew it was going to come. I thought it was going to be a lot closer than it was, 20-12. Yes, Penn State scored at the end of the game, which didn't really matter because they were already up. But yeah, Ohio State, they impressed me.
We're gonna gloss over, the last ranked game because there's really no point. The team that Michigan played against literally had a coach who was sexually assaulting people, and they got blown out because of it. So we're just gonna disregard that game completely. It was 49-0. Nothing much to add. So the last of the episode, the last thing we're gonna talk about. Your Cincinnati Bearcats losing. What's up with that? Tell me, what is up with that?
It's been the same story every game. We're not the same team, and people are like, "Wow, Cincinnati is terrible this year." Cincinnati, I thought Cincinnati was the best team in Ohio. Blah blah blah. We forget this.
Who said that?
A lot of people, a lot of Ohio State fans, a lot of people have said that that don't like Cincinnati. We forget Cincinnati just moved into the Big 12. It's gonna take time. It's gonna take a few years before we do this. Also, this is a new coach. I wasn't a big fan of the hire. Coach Satterfield, he's an okay coach. He coached at Louisville. He coached at Louisville. He coached at Appalachian State. And we're talking about a guy that hasn't been as proven because he hasn't been at a big. So we see Louisville's success now. They're 6-1. They were mediocre when he was there. I just don't think it was a great hire, and I don't think he fits our team. And also, like I mentioned, it's a young team. Let's be real. A very, very young team. We don't have a Desmond Ridder. We don't have a Tyler Scott or a Trey Tucker on the offense. We don't have a Sauce Gardner or an Ivan Pace Jr. leading our linebacker and leading our defense. Yes, we have Dante Corleone and Jawan Briggs, who are proven why they should be a second or a third round draft pick this coming April. But we've lost so many players over the last few years, and just to name a few like that have gotten drafted, like I mentioned, we have the likes of Sauce Gardner, Kobe Bryant, Arquan Bush, Ivan Pace Jr. left got undrafted free agent, and now he's starting in the NFL as the middle linebacker for the Vikings, and I believe has like the second highest linebacking grade in the NFL as an undrafted linebacker. He's very good. And then talk about the guys we lost that graduated: Javon Hicks, Leonard Taylor, Ty Fawson. We've lost so many good players over the last few years since we've been so good. It's a young core. It's a young group. We have Amari Jones, who has bounced around over the years. In his time, he started at Florida, and then he went to Arizona State, and then now he's here. So he's bounced around. I don't know if he's the perfect fit for us, and we're talking. And like I mentioned, it's a young team, but it's going to take time. Coach Satterfield, like I mentioned, I don't know.
He's not the right guy, it seems like.
He's not the right guy.
What'd you call for his firing?
No. Maybe next year.
Okay.
Because we just got him. He needs time. He's going to need time. And I might be a little bit hard on himself, but his best season at Louisville was 7-5. He had an overall record of 25-24. His best coaching was at Appalachian State when he went 51-24, and he went 38-10 in conference play. And he resigned at Appalachian State in 2018 after the bowl game, and his best season was 10-2 at Appalachian State. And Appalachian State's a good school. It's just they don't play competition like we do, like that we're accustomed to. We're talking about a team that's 3-4 years out from making the college football playoffs as the first ever non-Power 5 to make the college football playoffs. But it's where we're at. And every team goes through a rebuilding year and like a down year, a few down years. Oregon had it. Before Dan Lanning came, before Mario Cristobal came, in between like once Mark Helfrich left after we went to the college football championship. Ohio State had a down year from when Jim Tressel got fired to Urban Meyer taking over. They had that stretch. Even in
Luke Fickell.
Yeah, Luke Fickell. Alabama, they're like the one team that hasn't had that. But like Georgia, they had that.
This year.
Georgia, not really this year because they're still 7-1. They're still pretty good. Georgia had that down year before they got Kirby Smart from Bama. They struggled. They were not the top dogs in the SEC like we see now. Not that dynasty that won, 3 years in a row or something, but. Or 2 years, or it was Stetson Bennett and them. It's not the same, but it's every team goes through it. It's going to take some time. Give it one more year with Satterfield because we did commit a long-term contract with him. We did bring him in for a very long time, I believe.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting, but definitely we can't lose to Miami, Ohio. 16 years of beating them, and then we lose. At home, we lost at home at historic Nippert, one of the best stadiums and best atmospheres in the country, at a historic Nippert, and we lose. It's just heartbreaking. But yeah, Cincinnati. Hopefully they have a bounce back. We need a win in the Big 12. I don't believe we'll get it this week against Oklahoma State, which I'm very dreadful of, but hopefully we do it. But yeah, that's us talking about the games and kind of previewing for this week and talking about last week. And then we're going to end it pretty much now with who I have making the college football playoffs if the season ended.
So who would it be?
Just based off of the remaining season. So I'm going to go with Georgia. At one. And then for
who
2,
play number 4. No, do number 4.
Okay, 4. The winners of the Pac-12.
So who is that?
Washington, Oregon.
Who?
Whoever wins it.
Okay, well you can say that about every conference.
If my personal opinion, Oregon.
All right. What about number 2?
Winners of the Big Ten.
Which is?
Michigan.
Okay, who's number
It's going to
three?
be Ohio State, Michigan, but I have Michigan.
Then who's number
Number
three?
It could go either way. Depending on how Florida State does remaining throughout the season, or depending on how bad Alabama loses to Georgia in the SEC championship. If they lose before then, they're done. Then my next two up have to be OU as in Oklahoma and UW as Washington.
So who's number three then? Pick one. I'm gonna press you on this. You gotta answer.
See, the problem is
No problems. What's the answer?
But hear me out.
Gun to your head. What do you pick? The people want to know.
There's an argument to be made that Washington. No, sorry, not Washington. Michigan and Ohio State could both make it.
So Ohio State.
Yes and no. There is a small chance that Ohio State, depending on how bad they lose to Michigan at the end of the season, could make a push. They can have two Big Ten teams in the college football playoffs.
So Ohio State versus Michigan, 2 and 3.
They wouldn't put them together. No, they wouldn't put them together. They wouldn't put them together. There's no way that
the list is changing. Who's number 3? You have one choice.
Florida State. Jordan Travis, Keon Coleman, two really good players.
So then, who wins it all then?
Who do I have playing who? What is Georgia versus Oregon?
We all know who's going to win that game.
And Michigan, Florida State. It's not the same Georgia team that played Oregon 2 years ago. Oregon.
I think we know who's going to win.
Depends on if Brock Bowers is going to be there. Because Brock Bowers affects Georgia's offense completely.
Who you're betting $1,000 right now? Who wins out of those 4 teams? That's Michigan. Okay, Michigan. So you pick Michigan.
I'm going to take if those teams there. I think it could go either way with Georgia or Oregon. Because it's not the same Georgia team that has been there for the last 3 years. It's a new team, new quarterback. Half the defense is gone. No receivers outside of Brock Bowers. Dan Lanning's coached at Oregon. Coached at Georgia. He knows the system. He's got a lot of veterans. I think Oregon could beat Georgia.
Okay.
Michigan is going to wipe the floor with Florida State. It's going to be like Florida State versus Oregon from 2014 when Oregon beat the crap out of Florida State. And then Michigan will beat Georgia. Oregon, because Michigan's the... Honestly, I think Michigan is the best team in the country.
Okay.
So I think they're better than Georgia.
Okay.
But it's just because Georgia's the national champions. Michigan's the most complete team in the country. They have the best quarterback in the Big Ten. They have arguably one of the best running backs in the country. They have the best dual running back in the country. They have the top 3 coaches in the country.
Okay, that's a bit much, but yeah. So I don't know about that one, but we'll call it that. We'll call it there with our football episode. Sam's hard thought out decisions here.
There's so much that can go into the season. That's why it's so hard to pick.
Yep.
But yeah, that concludes our episode this week for our college football edition. Keep on the lookout for our NFL podcast, our college basketball, and then we will also have our soccer one released tomorrow or the next day. And then NBA will come soon once Casey's back. But definitely check us out on Spotify and watch on YouTube. And then follow us on Twitter or Instagram for up-to-date information. Or if you guys want to let us know what we want to talk about in the comments. And yeah. We'll see you guys soon. Peace.